Call this meeting of the Des Moines City Council for March 1st to order, and I will lead us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Councilmember Scheckler is not here this evening. Is there a motion to excuse?
So moved.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Pena, seconded by Councilmember Scott. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Okay, at this time, we will take public comments.
No one signed it.
Okay, no one signed in. Comments have to be limited to the items of business on tonight's study session, which is a slightly different format, obviously, than a regular council meeting. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to make comments related to agenda items tonight that did not sign up? Okay, seeing none, we'll get into first topic of discussion tonight, which is policy discussion regarding the sound code. As you recall, during our council retreat back in January, we identified issues that we wanted to address, both short and long term. We talked about looking at various codes in the city to see whether or not they were still necessary or not, or we wanted to take a look and make adjustments or eliminate them. And this was one of the items that was specifically brought up, and that's why we're talking about it tonight. So with that, Grant Fredericks, kick it off.
Thank you, Your Honor. Members of the council, Grant Fredericks, Planning, Building, Public Works Director, and I'm here with my colleague, Larry Picard, our building official, and we're here to talk to you about sound code and discuss perhaps a number of policy questions that we hope will result in some direction, or may result in some direction to us to bring back ordinances for your consideration. The council package is pretty detailed. It's got quite a bit of information. We've included a copy of an extract from our municipal code that lays out our requirements, a map that shows the distinction between the two areas in Des Moines, the area south of 252nd and the area north of 252nd, which are our two sound control areas. We've included, as an example, an extract from the Burien Municipal Code that shows how their city manages aircraft noise through their building code. And you'll notice or recall in the Burien Code there are three sound areas to distinguish between levels of noise impact. We've also included in your package a copy of a PowerPoint presentation the Port of Seattle staff made to a number of folks in this particular area impacted by Sea-Tac airport aircraft activity. It's an older presentation, but we think the maps in there kind of help underscore and explain what's going on with respect to aircraft noise and how aircraft noise has changed and improved over the years because of better airport operations and better designed airplanes. And finally, we've included some color maps in your package on the 1998 noise levels and the projected 2016 noise levels associated with that, and we've provided at the dais for your, to make it a little easier, kind of larger scale maps of what's in your council package, and we have on the screen available to illustrate some of those points on where the sound contours fall and how they may have changed from 1998 to 2016. Finally, in your package, we've identified some policy questions which you may want to consider And we don't have a recommendation for you tonight. We simply have a number of questions that have arisen as we discuss this with the City Council Finance and Economic Development Committee. Sure, there are many more policy questions that you may have on your mind. This is really intended to be your conversation among yourself and with our help in terms of facilitating that conversation. Out of that, we hope will come some consensus around what, if anything, we should do and how we should do it. And then we would bring back for your consideration specific ordinances or a specific ordinance which would address your policy, your direction. So I think, Your Honor, with that, be open to any council questions about the material, and then we are prepared to kind of walk through those policy questions unless you'd like to approach it in a little different way.
And I would like to make one additional comment. One of the questions that we cannot answer for you tonight is, what does the federal law say in regards to what our codes have to say for people who live within the noise impacted areas as defined by federal law? Do we have to have something in our code that says they have to have a higher level of insulation and better windows and the like in order for them to be eligible for the ports money and the FAA money? Or can we just have whatever requirements we would like to have? Would they still be eligible for receiving that port or FAA money? I did call and ask, right now I'm going to call her the new Diane Summerhays, but her name is Linda Stewart, and asked her that question. She said she didn't know. She would talk with their noise guy, Stan Shepard. He's been here at City Council before making presentations. He's doing a little bit of research into the federal statutes, and I'm scheduled to meet with them late in March to hopefully get an answer to that question. So I would just say the caveat being, if we decide we want to get rid of all of it in our code, I may come back to you and say, and if you do that, then nobody gets any FAA or port money.
Tony, is there a way to follow up? And I guess one of the things I struggle with is that back when these initial studies were done and they were insulating homes, there was a certification level that a window company had to have on their windows to say, it's essentially a certificate that said that they guaranteed this kind of noise reduction or insulation quality. Well, it would seem to me, and it's been said to me by several who are in the building profession, that certification costs a company a considerable amount of money. I've heard in the vicinity of $50,000. However, the technology and the different gases that are used and so forth, many of these windows still provide that by default today are manufactured to provide that kind of insulation standard. So if there's a way in that conversation to find out, okay, I guess do they have to have that certificate, or can we vet the technology based on the way the window or the insulation is constructed or the type of insulation it is, and still show that they can meet the standards, should that be a requirement?
Yes, and we'll certainly have more conversations with port staff on that subject. We specifically require in our municipal code the fact that these must be sound rated windows, and it could be one of the policy questions the council wants to consider, whether that ought to be in a kind of advisory or information, or whether it ought to be regulatory and enforced by our staff.
Okay.
So just to kind of set the stage for the policy questions, you'll notice you have two large maps that show the sound contours. One of them is a 1998 map. You'll see that in the upper right section in the legend. And one is a 2016 map. The first one I have on the screen is the 1998 sound contours, and you can see that the noise impacts extend well south into our community. If you look at the 2016 map, you'll see that those heavy, large impacts move considerably north, and you'll see what we call the DNL 65 line. That's the more darkly shaded area, moves from below Kent Des Moines Road up north of Kent Des Moines Road. So that could be one way to help understand and address the impacts associated with aircraft noise with regard to sound impacts. So those are, that's just data that's been provided to us by the port. And that, I can just get to the next slide. That then leads to the policy questions, if that's where you'd like to start, Your Honor.
Yeah, just one question before I get to you, Carmen. The Part 150 is supposed to conclude, the idea is that they're going to adopt the 2016 map. When is that supposed to conclude its public solicitation review and come forward with its recommendations to the FAA and the port?
My understanding is it's going to be at least a couple more years before they finish their work, they submit it to FAA, FAA reviews and approves it.
Okay. Carmen.
On the two maps, the center of where it comes down to a point on each color has not shifted from the mid-90s to the later projection. And yet it seems that with the third runway being further west by a number of blocks, there should have been some indication of the effect of the third runway. I don't see it in these diagrams.
And unfortunately, I can't explain why that is, because those of you who live on North Hill or near North Hill are impacted by the third runway operations know, and we heard from Mr. Williams as he was asking us to reclassify his property, Blueberry Lane property along Des Moines Memorial Drive, that their plan to build residential development in the area was just kind of preempted by the third runway noise, and they needed to move to an industrial kind of.
And I can help answer that a little bit. That question has been asked at the various meetings I've been at where this information was presented by the port. And the two general answers are, one, as Grant said earlier, airplanes are getting quieter with the advances in technology. But second, the third runway is more of an arrivals runway than it is a departure runway. And this reflects the fact that there is more planes, at least over the last year and a half, that are coming in from the north and landing on that runway, and most takeoffs are being done from the first and second runway.
Well,
Of course, when they redid the east runway, they moved a great deal over to that runway for some length of time, and I think they either have or are going to do the same thing when they redo the middle runway.
and
So
they actually did some work on the second runway, and it's interesting that the information provided in their presentations from 2009, which I suspect wasn't necessarily at the end of 2009, and did not include 2010 when they were working on specific concrete panels on the second runway, which was shut down for significant amounts of time. And so we would have gotten a better picture of a more constant flow of air traffic to the south during that period of time to know what essentially what you would call the high water mark would be, assuming that the third runway was being used for takeoffs as well as landings.
Well, I would have expected on, let's say, the northernmost 4 inches at least, some more effect west of where it's shown, because you can see the belly of the airplanes right over your head on Des Moines Way. You know that there has to be more impact than there was when there were only 2 runways.
And again, that has been asked, and the answer we constantly get is, this is what we're measuring, and it's because the airplanes are getting quieter.
So they're saying that the answers to the measurements aren't shown yet. They're not done doing that yet.
For the most part, I believe they are, and that's what's reflected here. But now there's a process. Part 150 is more than just measuring the aircraft noise. It also then starts looking at, well, what do we do about the impacts that are occurring? So they have to go through a whole process of figuring out what sort of impacts are there, what sort of ways can we mitigate them, which ones fall into the realm of possible according to the federal regulations, and then they eventually adopt something.
So let's start with some of the policy questions that have been identified here for us to be able to discuss. And the first one is, should the council modify the current sound code at this time or wait until later? Should we wait until the Part 150 work has been concluded, or should we modify the current code now? And Matt and Jeanette.
This is one topic that I hear about repeatedly. People, especially when it comes to home improvements, they really want to see us take some action and open things up. And I think we need to act now. I think there's a lot of frustration out there, and I also think that people are willing to do things without following a permitting process or whatever because they're working around the system. And again, we want them to comply with the system, and I think they're just finding it too rigid. So I think we need to address it now.
And Jeanette?
I would agree. I think we should move forward, and then if we find out from staff that there are some certain requirements, then we can adjust for those, but I think we should move forward now. And also on the remodeling, there's a couple that's in my choir at church, and they, I think this is a year or two ago, they were just going to take out the windows they had and put new windows in, and the permit was over $700. So that's a problem. And that's not even, I mean, I don't know if the permit was expensive because they had to do the sound thing, but that was in addition to having to do the sound windows.
Just to speak to the question of how we establish the cost for permits, it's a value-based calculation. So based upon the value of the work, Larry, what's the percentage? It's a table that we use.
So the more expensive windows made the permit more.
Yes.
Okay. Carmen, Melissa, Dan, what are your thoughts? Pursue now or later?
If you're willing to listen to thoughts, I have some.
On this,
I guess
on this policy issue.
Oh. Okay, modify. The word modify is in that sentence.
Yes.
Okay. I think if we were to make it advisory, because I believe the mood of the council is going to be that it's too stringent right now. Mm-hmm. My concern is that the rules we have now have been in place probably for at least 15 years.
Yes.
So everything that's been built in the last 15 years has very stringent codes if it's within these boundaries, within what we require, making that a selling point for real estate agents, that this house has had the package, it's really quiet, it's really energy efficient. I think for the sake of fairness to future purchasers, if we relax the rules and make it advisory, that we at least need to have some kind of a record in the file for the construction that was done as to what parameters they did meet, whether they met the more stringent ones, which really, I know they cost a lot because it was done to my house, but they also create great energy efficiency and great quietness compared to the noise previously. So I wouldn't want a buyer not to be able to come and see what code was this built to. I'd like it to be a part of what you check off as the as-built R factor or window factor or whatever, just so that it's of record in an appropriate place if we go to letting it be advisory.
Well, to the extent that there's a permit, any kind of permit required, we could certainly make a note in our records as to the type of insulation, I believe. Can we not, Larry?
And windows, and whether it's 2x6 or 2x4. When we finished off a room above our garage that we had built in 1977 and used as a shop, we did that in 2003, and we had to tear out the insulation, change the 2x4s to 2x6s, put in thicker insulation, and then put on 2 layers of plasterboard on all walls and ceiling. It cost us probably at $28,000 when originally it was about a $12,000 job, and that's just for a 500 square foot room above a 2-car garage. So I know it's expensive. I know it also gave us tremendous energy efficiency and quietness. So if you just had the current rules on a little checkoff list, because your inspectors do come and do inspections and check off, and then a set of boxes next to that that shows what thresholds they met in an as-built, what they really built to, it seems to me that's fairer to the purchaser who may be told, oh, they met the energy standards.
Well, we'll certainly, those are very good ideas, and we'll certainly think of a way to incorporate that if that's the direction of the council. So, and just to answer your question, Councilmember Scott, these rules were first put in place 20 years ago and updated 16 years ago, so they've been in place for a very long time.
Right. So they're, yeah.
Okay. Melissa and Dan?
I would think, just to speak to policy question 1, we should begin now.
And you, Dan?
I think we should wait to a little bit later, and that the reason is because of this is Boeing has a whole new aircraft coming through, which we haven't seen yet. And in fact, a couple new ones coming through we haven't seen yet, and we haven't seen their impact on Sea-Tac. And also Airbus has a large number. The air industry is going to boom in the next 10 years. And they're probably all going to belly up because there's not that many passengers, but we're going to have a change of noise. And we also hope to rebuild these, at least I do, hope to rebuild these houses around town that have been abandoned. And we have to have a stand for them, and I'm not sure if we can work a double standard or not on those. So I would say hold off for now.
Well, to speak to Councilmember Caldwell's point, that these are projected 2016 noise contours. So I think the airport folks, and Tony, if I've got this a little bit wrong, you can jump in, but I think they've anticipated, the Dreamliner and the other aircraft that might be using the field, Sea-Tac Airport, and that next generation of aircraft is built into the 2016 forecast for noise impacts. So.
Yeah, and my opinion on it is, I guess the first question that I have is in terms of the building code, obviously the standards, we've adopted the state building code, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, this is the only part of the state building code that is different.
Correct.
Or the only part of the building code which is different from the state adopted.
And in the 20 years since we adopted this, the state building code has increased in terms of the efficiency of windows, both in terms of noise attenuation and energy efficiency.
Mostly energy, yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. I don't disagree entirely with what Dan is saying, with the Councilmember Caldwell, relative to noise. I mean, I think that a lot of the Boeing planes have been designed with a lot of things in mind, but I wouldn't say the same thing is true about Airbus. And if the monster plane eventually does land and take off out of Sea-Tac, assuming that it can support the weight of passengers, the fuel, and everything else without cracking the concrete and having gates that could accommodate it, that's a big noisy plane. And there are other aircraft as well that do put in. They will be replaced over time, however. And so for that reason, I'm willing to consider modification at this time. But I think we need to keep in mind that there may be areas within the city that require, that may in the future require, or as we go through and evaluate this, more attention to the amount of sound protection compared to other areas of the city. So there seems to be consensus for dealing with this now, and that's the answer to policy question number 1. Policy question number 2, should Area 2 south of 252nd be eliminated? And could you explain again the elements of south of 252nd?
Well, the area we're talking now is on attachment 2 of the council package. It shows Area 1, which is the area north of 252nd, Area 2 south, and maybe I can just circle back to look at the noise contours here. We'll look at the 2016 contours. So you can see that there is some noise impact in this area that my cursor is tracking. 252nd, sure my eyes are good enough to pick up to, I think it's right through here.
240, there.
That little number in the middle.
So there is some noise impact associated with airport operations south of 252nd, but it's minimal. And in our technical opinion, there's not a real need to have regulations in effect for the area south of 252nd in Sound Area 2.
And refresh me how Federal Way handles.
I don't believe Federal Way has a sound code. There's no.
Burien.
Okay.
Burien is the only
Jeanette.
other city.
I think we should eliminate Area 2 because the planes are getting quieter, and the 2016 one, which we're not to yet, but it has all of the area below and a lot of area above 252nd, also in the lighter area that we have no requirements on right now, so I think it should be eliminated.
Okay. Matt?
Yeah, I think with the, they call them stage 3 aircraft, so they're much quieter and they're much more fuel efficient. And there are new federal standards that are for noise corridors as well, and aircraft handling in those corridors. Also, there's some newly approved, and I believe, I'm not exactly sure what the status is, but I know it's very close, is there are newly approved landing standards that provide for a much quieter landing, in that currently they step down throttle, step down throttle, step down throttle. This is a glide in and a diagonal approach. That's been vetted and is being supported. So I think given all that and how far out 252nd is from the actual, airport, I don't think there's any value in keeping that area. So I would support us moving forward with that.
I would as well.
Carmen?
I think 3/4 of the year, 3/4 of the flights take off to the south. It's mostly in the summer that changes. And I think that's when they're pouring on the colds, is during takeoff. I thought that I was reading quite a bit about Marine Hills and Federal Way when the third runway came into effect, about the alarmingly increased amount of noise from the planes that take off to the south. So I don't know that the people who live under the center of that area would necessarily agree with what we're saying of that pathway south.
Okay. Melissa, Dan?
Okay. Now, I'm kind of mixed emotion on this, but like you're saying a while back, the current flight pattern will be smaller going to Sea-Tac. The planes are coming in idly and they're about a third less distance than they previously came in at. previously their way out and may turn in from Elliott Bay, for example, and south end. We should keep the impact pressure on that area because we're apt to find an increase in noise in that area due to the flight pattern being shortened. And we don't know how the aircraft are going to respond, whether there be a burst of sound as they touch in or whether they'll be able to glide all the way down. The current intention is to be semi-gliding all the way down from flight altitude where you only have idles. But again, these new aircraft coming out, they have particular noise characteristics that we're not familiar with. They may have a high whine or something in the background. And we should have something, some way to look forward for that, or look for that. Am I making sense there?
Yeah, so, okay, so you're not in favor of eliminating the area at this point?
Right.
Okay. And you know, it is hard to predict because I agree that the nature of landings is changing. I agree that the nature of the aircraft is changing. I think there are impacts from the third runway in terms of the footprint or the contour there that are probably not taken into account. But I think that's more of an east-west issue than it is necessarily a north-south issue. For that reason, I'm willing to consider elimination of Area 2. So that's consensus of the council. Now, with that, does that...
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah,
when you say consensus of the council, you don't mean that we all agree then?
correct. What it means is that...
The sense of the...
There's enough consensus, just mean, and by consensus, what we're doing is we're giving direction to staff to come back with a draft that reflects what the consensus is, where the votes are likely to be based upon when it eventually comes to us. That's all it means. So we're helping them try and tailor what needs to be drafted. I guess that's the... Now, are 3 and 4 impacted by the decision we made on policy 2?
If we eliminate Area 1, then policy 3 basically says, from 252nd, should we just move the line up?
Well, no, we talked about eliminating Area 2,
Right, I'm sorry.
right?
So
So that
now
leaves
the-
Area 1.
That leaves Area 1,
Even if
where
it's the
the
only
boundary
area.
is currently established at 252nd.
Yeah.
The question is, should it be moved up to Kent Des Moines Road?
Shrink Area 1.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's, okay.
You want to-
And you could look at question 3 and 4 kind of together.
Because it's a question of how far north.
Well, one is the question of how far north, and the other one is the question of how much do you want to squeeze it in east-west and make it be just that contour line that's the 65 DNL.
Okay, let's take these separately. So should the southern boundary of Area 1 be moved north from 252nd to Kent Des Moines Road? I'd like to kick that off. Matt?
You know, I look at the comparisons of the corridor, and if you look at the map that was done in 1998, it comes down and touches the 70 DNL corridor comes down to 240th. It's that corridor on the 216 contour moves up to just below 200th, which is quite far north of Kent Des Moines Road, and having a house in that area, where around the 240th area, I can tell you that the noise has definitely improved. And so, from what I see, I think I would be in favor of moving Area 1 north from 252nd.
Jeanette?
Yeah, I'm wondering if the original was based on the sound contours, I don't know, but looking at the maps, it looks like it should be further north than the Kent Des Moines Road.
Melissa, Carmen?
Well, I wish I had, I was looking for David Ledowitz's email that we received earlier today, because he used a phrase that I thought kind of summarizes about, we're almost trying to be too prescriptive and like hold the builder's hands and the homeowner's hands. And so I look at this and I think we're not telling people who remodel that they can't use the higher soundproofing standards. If someone's living in a neighborhood and they're like, I know I don't have to, but I'm going to do this. And I think it said, make the city code advisory. Oh, there was something else in there, but so, I mean, I look at this and I think of the committee conversations that we're having and talking with community members, and I think, Tony, you and I had a conversation maybe a year ago regarding, at what point do we as a city and as policymakers try to decide that we know better than the people living in the neighborhoods, and so we're going to, we're going to have these building codes because, boy, we're going to make sure that they have the most soundproof house there is, and at a certain point I always feel like we're inviting noncompliance. We're inviting people to pick up a couple windows here and there, and 3-day weekend's coming up, so I'm going to change those out quickly and no one's going to notice. And so, I would rather that we have some policies and some code changes pursuant to what the noise contours are now reflecting, and we're able to say now you can make the changes, that it's not going to be as cost prohibitive. You can do it within the guidelines of the city code, that you can take advantage of having our inspectors come out and make sure that the installation is being done correctly. But we're not making it financially so hard for some of these residents to make the upgrades necessary in their homes. Because, they're right now probably not in very, and I get to thinking more about energy efficiency versus noise control, and that there are products out there in the market that we have homeowners that could be taking advantage of, but that they won't because they can't afford to make the upgrades because of the sound regulations that we have in place. So I think that I would support moving that boundary north to the Kent Des Moines Road, just to, I think, invite maybe more people that have been doing home improvements and keeping them on the back burner to maybe move forward with them now.
Carmen, and then Dan.
I think it is important for us not to erase boundaries that are based on noise levels that have been measured by the port. I think making it an advisory rule leaves the choice in the hands of the homeowner. So the whole point you're trying to achieve is just one word. Advisory takes care of that. But if in the future these, and this is what was being used by the port in 1996 to show the LDN contours, and it is the same as the one that you gave us for 98. And I was here then. I know it was based on noise contours. So I don't think we should take the step of no longer showing what the noise contours are. I just think we should take away the requirement to do something.
Agreed.
And perhaps we need to update the noise contours as the port says that they have changed.
So, okay, and that's basically we're being asked here. Should that boundary be moved north to reflect what the new map's going to show?
Well, they are saying that 4 years from now, they think it will be this. And this is so old that neither one of these shows what it is today. So we're just sort of guessing if we decide where to move it to. I think just by changing it to advisory and updating the contour maps as the port gives us the information that says where the noise levels are is what I would prefer to see.
For a point of clarification, please.
Yeah.
We're not suggesting that we don't show the contour maps as I thought. We are talking about the naming of an area based on our own ordinance. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
So we would always want to show the ordinance, and I agree with the idea of advise, but I want to make sure that we're clear. We're talking about an area as defined in the ordinance, but that doesn't, it's how we have tied our ordinance to the noise contour maps that are constantly changing. In fact, rather than have Area 1 or Area 2, should we just not have something like this in the ordinance?
Well, except
Too many.
you have variances in the boundaries, and I'll speak to that after Dan's had a shot.
But if we've eliminated Area 2, we only have one area.
Right.
So now all you're doing is showing what the anticipated noise is in that area. So any planning, any change you do to any other ordinance just pertains to.
Only if you make it advisory, only if you're having the same standard across the city. And that may not necessarily be the case, depending upon, that's why we're
See
going
that.
through each of these things. And I'll say my piece now, sorry, Dan. And I'll have you go first the next time around. In the condominiums I live in, essentially, I'll be blunt, we got screwed by the port because they wouldn't do multifamily. And then they did some tests on multifamily, and the ones they picked, a couple of them worked, one of them didn't, so they stopped doing multifamily. And so what's happened is the footprint shrunk. But I'm willing to bet if you actually put an LDN noise measurement out there, either because of the contour of where my property is located, the noise has not abated to the same degree that it has on the projected footprint. Okay?
Right.
And so the conversation about replacing windows came up because our place is drafty and old. It was built 30 years ago. We want new windows in our place. And I'm sure it would be a lot cheaper if we didn't have to put in to the standard that we have now in terms of the noise attenuation windows and everything else we would probably have to do to depending upon what percentage of the property was being changed and everything else we have to bring up to code. And at the same time, we're on the hook for it because the port's not, or the FAA is not paying for it. So, I know because of where I live, which is just north of Kent Des Moines Road and just east of one contour and just west of another in the current map, and just east of the whichever LDN that is, 65, that my property will never wind up being taken care of, despite years of impact, despite any number of other things. Okay. The question then becomes, is that area still going, there's still always going to be some level of impact. And so the question becomes, do you not ensure that those properties, that those things that are built within that contour are in fact being taken care of? Now, a number of them were taken care of years ago by the port, and the port wound up coming back and redoing them because, technology changed or the solutions failed or what have you. So to me, there's kind of a balancing act there, and I don't know that you can just dismiss out of hand. I have concerns about dismissing it out of hand. And I would need to be shown, or it would need to be demonstrated to me that whatever is being proposed from an advisory standpoint is equal to the level of protection that would be provided now, or at the point that, my complex was built 30 years ago. So I'm trying to reconcile, because one of our responsibilities is making sure that the impacts on our residents are truly being taken care of as well. And no matter how quiet the planes get, X miles south of the runway, you're going to hear the noise. And during the summertime, that's 70% of the time. Carmen's right. So it's not a black and white thing. It's not, to me, there's not a clear, easy to say, yeah, let's do this, or just make it advisory. I mean, it's a little more complex than that, only because I feel like we have a responsibility making sure that people's property are in fact being protected from the standpoint of building standards. And if that can be addressed via the quality of the materials being used and installed, then maybe that answers the question. That's left open right now. So, anyhow, that's kind of where I'm coming from. Yeah, Dan?
I have to agree with you on that, because so often as the homes were built a long time ago, built to a certain standard, and getting back to using the airport contours. The airport contours were noise levels for when they built the second runway. When they built the third one, they used the same lines. If you ever set the two contours side by side, you find that third runway is offset from the second runway, and it should be right. It should be a straight line from the third runway. They've just never brought that up, and that should be looked at. Perhaps another airport buyout type program where they insulate homes for us, or the ones. It's expensive to redo your house, like Dave said. And so I just say keep the noise level at that point, or move it south.
So to clarify, I'm willing
Move it to north. I'll move it that way.
So to clarify, I'm willing to move the boundary up to Kent Des Moines Road, but I'm not willing to eliminate it entirely. So at least on policy number 3, I'm willing to move it north to that. And there appears to be consensus for that, or further north.
I like the advisory part.
Well, we'll get to that too, but
Okay.
We're working our way down the laundry list here.
Your Honor, maybe if I could just add one additional comment. We're certainly concerned about a regulatory burden, and that's one of the things that's always a challenge for those of us in our line of business. We also play, we think, an important role in terms of consumer protection. And to the extent that permits are required for this kind of work, it allows us to help the homeowner make sure that their installations are done in a workmanlike way, that the flashing's done as opposed to simply cutting out the old window, putting a new window in, throwing a bead of caulk on there and calling it good to go. We see way too many situations where it has not been properly flashed, where there is moisture that's gotten into the cavity of the wall section, mold has been developed, and all of a sudden people are faced with tens of thousands of dollars to correct that particular problem. So, there are any number of top quality contractors out there who will do it in exactly the right way, but there are unfortunately also those folks who are kind of hit and run contractors who will come in, sell folks a bill of goods, do something that's shoddy workmanship, and our ability to help the consumer in this particular way is affected. So.
Jeanette?
Yes, but that has nothing to do with the sound issue, because
No, it doesn't.
Building in general, and the way it affects the sound issue is when people, like was said earlier, will go around the system and not even get a building permit because of the sound issue makes it so expensive.
I acknowledge those are good points.
Melissa?
Well, and I was just going to say, you kind of just expounded on the point that I had made, is that if we make it more advisory and make it easier to get those permits, and we are opening it up to the benefits of having someone like Larry come out and say, that spray insulation is going to nullify the warranty on your window. Are you sure you want your installer to do that? And I think that everybody I've ever talked to that's had Larry come out gets something from that. And so I think that if we make getting a permit to have work done more accessible and not so costly, then more people will do that.
Yeah.
But also to your point, Grant, I think you guys do serve a critical function. And again, I agree with actually both the statements. It really doesn't have anything to do with the type of window that's going in. It has to do with the quality of the installation itself. And frankly, I want somebody to be able to tell me that I am getting a quality installation or not, because that's not my area of expertise and I don't know. But I also think that when it comes down to permitting, I think you probably need to have some kind of variable in there, because you can have a house it's quite large and has a lot of windows, and then you can have other houses that are smaller and have fewer windows. And I don't know how you balance that out, but I also don't want to get into a permitting process that is, again, so costly that people won't do it. So your point's well taken, though.
Okay, policy question number 4, should the areas outside the projected 2016 DNL 65 contour be eliminated from Area 1 or have lesser sound transmission control requirements?
So
Melissa?
So for clarification, what we'd be talking about is anything that is in the little 70 horn that comes down through the middle of that impact area, the noise contour.
Almost to the Kent Des Moines Road, is that the one?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the 2016, so it'd be narrowing up the Area 1 that's currently in the attached to.
Assuming this were the contour map, you're essentially talking about the triangle between Kent Des Moines Road on the south, Internet Highway on the east, and Des Moines Memorial Drive or so on the west.
Mm-hmm.
Jeanette?
I think it would be a good idea to do that, because not only does the projected map have that, but the older map has that as well. The only concern is that it doesn't reflect the third runway, but
2016 map does reflect a third runway. A third runway is assumed. It is partially based upon current measured sound, and then there is a projection made based upon assumptions on the type of aircraft, use of the runways, and the like.
Matt?
Just quickly, I'm kind of played mental ping pong with this one. If we agreed in theory that we should consider eliminating Area 2, then it takes us down to one area. Mm-hmm. And to your point earlier, Dave, what we do inside that area is really more of the issue. We're saying that that's an area that's impacted. Now, how much it's impacted is going to vary based on what the noise contours turn out to be. So I don't know that actually eliminating, I don't know what the gain would be by adding or eliminating anything, because we haven't figured out what we're going to do in Area 1.
should we skip that one till later?
The size of the, Melissa?
I would. My concern being that up in that area that we're talking about removing out of Area 1 would be what's currently the Aviation High School / Olympic. And that, and I don't know what that does to the remediation obligations of the FAA if that school's replaced. Because right now there was an agreement between the district and the FAA that they would match funds for funds if that building is ever remediated or rebuilt for the noise proofing. If we were to take that out of a noise impact area.
It's a function of the standing agreement.
Okay.
And they've already received FAA dollars in the remodel and so forth, but I don't know what the impact would be. I do know that
Okay, well, let's skip.
it's called out in their current agreement.
Okay, let's skip. Oh, Dan?
Yeah, I was going to comment also. Again, on the, looking historically from when these first contour maps were made, these were pretty noisy aircraft coming out of Sea-Tac, but they weren't flying that often. Now, nowadays, we've got full aircraft flying out, full capacity, more of them, and we're having what amounts to smaller sticks of dynamite going off in the backyard. That used to be the standard phrase of the DNLs was how noisy, the average now of a stick of dynamite going off in the backyard. Well, they're using smaller sticks now, but they go more frequently. So we're getting a lower overall noise average, but we still have a high noise level, which will likely increase. And I think I'll skip on to the next question next.
Okay. Jeanette?
I'm wondering if we could move to number 7, because that's going to affect how we look at 4, 5, and 6.
Okay, well, that's fine. Let's take it up because a few people have mentioned it, and so the question is, should the code be advisory, not mandatory, and/or provide for voluntary compliance? And exactly what does it mean to be advisory as opposed to voluntary or mandatory?
Well, advisory may not even be in the code, or we might have a reference in the code that says, check with the building official to see what our current recommendations are with regard to dealing with sound in your particular neighborhood. I mean, it could be something very generic and general, and not even included in the municipal code. Voluntary, it could be explicitly voluntary, where the standard is established, and we're recommending it, but we're not requiring it to be a permitted activity. Of course, mandatory is very prescriptive and has very specific recommendations or requirements. I'm sorry.
Melissa, and then Dan.
If we head down the path of advisory, mandatory, voluntary, I think of like LEED green belt buildings where you get certain types of rebates back from, if let's say a builder comes in and, here's what the building standard is, here's what the minimum requirements are, but if you build to a higher sound standard, the city would grant you some type of because the cost to build the building would be higher, they would get some type of permitting rebate back again as an incentive to still adhere to the higher building standards, but not make it a requirement. The thought being the cost to have the thicker framing and the double wide sheetrock and the higher soundproofed windows would be a more expensive construction at a minimum, but maybe there's some type of an incentive with a new construction project that would make it worth pursuing. I don't know if that's something that the city had thought about or something that committee could toss around a little more. I don't know. Just a thought.
Okay, Dan, and then Carmen.
Okay, did we hit the,
All the way down.
okay, I was working on number 5, I was just getting into, putting the noise level, the sound applications to new homes only and not remodels. Reason I'm saying that is so many homes around here are nice, but they're just constructed to another period.
Oh, we skipped over that. We're on number 7.
Oh, we're
I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But we're going to go back.
We're going to go back.
Yeah, no, I was, yeah.
Okay, let's try 7.
I thought I rolled it all
Okay,
together.
okay. Yeah, advisory. Because, again, there's many homes around here that could be rebuilt and be first-class homes. We went through a period of building boom where there was an awful lot of construction with just 2x4s holding everything up. And that's my opinion is poor construction. And the new construction coming up will probably be in the area around the county will probably be 2x4s again. So we have the classy homes available to remodel, but we can't rebuild them from scratch. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Carmen?
You are not saying that they wouldn't have to meet codes that are as stringent as current state codes.
They still have to meet the International Building Code as adopted by the State Building Code Council. So
Right.
yes, we're not talking about anything that's
Okay, right. So insulation levels and everything else, whether it's
Energy
a
code.
remodel or not, would still be as stringent as the state requires anywhere.
yes.
So,
So are you in favor of advisory or not?
of which?
Advisory. You said earlier that you were.
I
so let's-
am, but I think for our boundaries, if we could say that if you are inside of a 65 LDN contour, this is what we would advise you to consider doing in addition. If you're outside of that contour, then we need not have any extra advisory things. I think it has to be based on something that's rational, and these contours, although this one that's from 98, it's identical to what the port put out in 96, and on there it says, this information was established in 1985 based on projected noise contours for the year 2000. So this was a pie in the sky too, 15 years before, trying to figure out what it was going to be. I don't know if they did this one in the year 2000 or 2001, projecting what they think will be happening in 2016. But they are the only people spending money on establishing some contours. So we might as well use the most recent one that's valid, supposedly, and say nothing that's outside of 65 needs to have an advisory. If you're inside of 65, then there is an advisory that it may be beneficial to you to look at what you could do to make it overcome. And by the way, Puget Sound Energy over the years has had quite a few different things that they will reimburse you for if you do more energy features. So that is covered to a degree by doing it right. And when people go to sell a house, it's a requirement of the state that they fill out a disclosure. Now, they are allowed to say don't know if they don't know. But whether or not they've had remodeling done, whether there have been permits and inspections done or not, and if they say don't know, or if they say no, there were no permits, there were no inspections, they're raising a red flag, and then when the inspection occurs during the sale, that inspector is going to look very carefully at whether things were done professionally or not. So quite frankly, I think of the number of people that you are so worried about that want to skirt the rules and break the law as being a tiny percentage of our population. And I don't think we should base our decisions on people who don't want to do what they legally ought to do, at least not as strongly as I'm hearing.
Okay, so you would make it advisory within the 65 and higher?
65 or
LDA?
higher, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Matt?
I may be misinterpreting this, but it says, the top line says, policy questions the council may wish to consider include. And I'm just looking at, yeah, I'd like to be able to consider when we talk about ordinances, some portions of it being advisory and some portions being mandatory. It's stated, should the city's code be advisory? The general statement, no, I would say our city code should not be advisory, but we might have places where we have recommendations or we're advising something, and then we'd have other places.
This is specific to the sound transmission part of it.
I understand, but it could apply differently. As I'm going back to my point, I guess, earlier, where I said we have one area, and then we have this whole city. Is all of Area 1 going to be handled the same way? I think not.
From what I just heard,
but maybe.
From what I just heard is we take the most current noise contour map. Right now, that's the one from 1998, because the other one hasn't been adopted yet. It's still being developed. So the one for 1998, anybody who walks in to build a new home within the 65 DNL or to remodel a home within the 65 DNL, we will advise them that they should consider doing a higher level of work in their house because of sound transmission issues.
Actually, based on what we've said, the 60 north of Kent Des Moines Road.
I'm kind of saying all of that discussion based on what I just heard may be moot. Now, you could also say use the proposed ones, which would be again, just the stuff that's within the 65 DNL contour. That's what I
You
just
could
heard.
say that, or you could also turn around and say, hey, look, we've got a question about building officials having discretion to waive for equivalent performance. We could focus on the fact that there are some areas in here that are, I don't know, I'm not sure if it's 75 or 80 by matching up the colors, but they're at a higher level. So it doesn't mean that just if you fall within the 65 DNL corridor, but boy, I mean, if you're...
Set aside the boundary part of it.
I'm just...
Are you in favor of the advisory part of it? The advisory approach?
I want that as an option, yes. But I'm not saying that any code we put down, I'm not saying, it's worded, it's saying if we put down something, should it be advisory?
It needs to be the city's noise attenuation code, not just the
Yes.
city's code.
I
That's what
understand, I am talking about that, but what I'm saying is that the noise attenuation necessary through a variety of these areas could be different. In one case, we may require it, in another case, we may make it an advisory. I support the option, but it seems like we're talking all or nothing across this dais, and it concerns me.
Okay, so you don't support,
I support having the idea of advisory, but I don't think that all of our codes around noise attenuation need to be advisory necessarily. I'm not sure that if you live at the end of the Rabbit, down at the end of the third runway, and you happen to have a house and you're still there, that it should be advisory at that point. Because otherwise, you've created a zone that no one would ever be able to sell. So I think it's situationally, and I'm not talking about spot zoning or anything like that. I'm just saying that we have to have a chance to vet this.
Then
Conceptually, yes.
I think the question.
I think, just from the way I'm seeing these colors on the new map, 65 comes down to here.
No.
No.
It's-
Yeah,
it's
the
next one up.
cream color, which is, okay, this is 60.
only look at the three darkest colors. That will answer
Well, there
your
are
question.
two colors here, and a third color here, and a fourth
And it's
color
right where
here.
your finger
a
was.
fifth color here, and then cream beyond that.
It's the section that dips down just to before, and it barely.
Just south of
touches
Kent Des Moines
Kent Des
Road.
This one on the new map?
Yes, that is the 65.
I doubt that.
I don't. Yeah. I'm sorry, Jeanette.
Yes. I'm thinking maybe if all or part of the sound attenuation code is advisory, maybe what we should do is have the permit cost be based on without the extra requirements for the sound. And that way, it would be an incentive, because then the money that they would have spent on the permit, they could use towards better windows or structure.
Okay. I see what you're saying. There has to be some minimal permit amount, though, because we still have to send someone out there to inspect regardless of the quality of the window.
Right, but the permit's based on the cost of the improvement. So if the improvement could be either without the sound requirements or with, that the permit fee be based on without the requirements.
We could,
Because you won't know, if it's advisory, you won't know if they're going to do that or not.
Right.
we could adjust or make an adjustment in the fee calculation to kind of remove the marginal cost associated with the extra cost associated with sound attenuation. So this is something we could do on our end.
Easily.
Melissa?
Could you even set up some type of, like a flat rate permitting price per window type of thing versus the value of the windows?
Actually, no, you really can't, because sometimes when you're doing the work, it could easily be just popping a window out, popping a window in. But if there's any additional work that has to be done, any new framing has to be done, other things that have to be replaced, then there's more activity going on, more things that the inspector has to look at, more things that the plans examiner has to look at. It's not a straight line relationship between the amount of work we do and the value of a project, but it's reasonably close enough that that's a good way to determine what your permit fee is going to be. But I think if we want to encourage people to do the sound activity on these type of projects, basing their permit on what it would have been if they just did the bare minimum is a very smart thing to do. And within our fee-setting authorities, we'll take a good hard look at that and probably change it before it comes back to council.
Okay. It appears that there's consensus for making it advisory if limited, and the limiting factor may be geographic based upon LDN or street boundaries or something. Am I summarizing that correctly, Nathan? Okay. Well, let's ask the converse. Is there any area that we believe it should be mandatory?
Mr. Rapid?
At this point, I would have a difficult time answering that.
What would you
Because-
need? What would you need in order to come to a conclusion on that?
Well, okay, so we have some folks that, when we looked at rezoning and some commercial areas around Kent Des Moines Road, there were people who had some insight there that I didn't have. They came.
Oh, you mean Des Moines Memorial Drive?
Thank you.
Okay.
I misspoke. And I guess what I'm saying is that at this point, I could say, I don't think there's a place that would be mandatory, or I do think there is, but there's information that I don't have and haven't had the chance to process yet, so I would have a difficult time answering that.
What kind of information would you need to make that decision? We need to be able to help direct staff on what to go look for. So what is it? What does we need to have them come back?
What I'm saying is, if they come to us with the concept of going to an advisory policy in a particular area, and then citizens came or somebody came and presented us with information that said, in this area, that would be a problem, I would give it I'd give it consideration. That's all. You asked me if I would consider any area right now mandatory, and the answer would have to be no.
Your Honor, if that's the kind of the sense of the council, they'd like to see a proposal kind of developed along those kind of general lines where there is advisory, discretionary, or mandatory. We could certainly come up with that with a rationale to support an approach like that for the council's consideration.
Does the city, let me ask a question, and then Dan, Jeanette, and Carmen. Does the city of Sea-Tac have their own sound standards for that portion of the city that is between our northern boundary and the south end of the airport?
Council, or Mayor Kaplan. No, sir, not that I'm aware of. There's some agreements that were made between the port and the city of Sea-Tac that I'm not privy to all of them, but back a number of years ago, money was exchanged in order to do some things, and I mean, you know, everything was above board, but I'm not privy to all of those details, sir, and I would just...
But the answer is they don't have a requirement in their code for anything above and beyond the minimums required in the building code adopted by the state.
But the FAA may have, if someone requested it and they were within the footprint, they still got it, even if Sea-Tac didn't change it.
I believe so.
Okay. And that would still apply within whatever the new footprint would be, correct?
Yes, and we could certainly, that will be one of the areas that we research when we come back to council. I'm pretty sure that most of their housing stock is east of SR 99, except for the area along Des Moines Memorial Drive. So I think we can certainly probe into that with Sea-Tac on how that works with them.
Okay, great. And again, Dan, Jeanette, and Carmen.
Okay, first off, we have the second half of 7 or the first half of 8.
Well, we were asking the converse question on whether or not there should be a mandatory area.
Yeah.
And the consensus seems to be to make it advisory with some sort of boundaries. There doesn't appear to be a definitive answer yet on making or designating a mandatory area.
You know, my thinking was along the line that some things are not even being considered too much in the code, but the trees around the area, these Wascoot trees, they were 20 or 30 feet shorter. They provide a lot of insulation for noise. They may not provide protection from storms, speaking from experience, but anyway, they would keep noise down. And or a house constructed with a bluff in between them and the airport. Like I am kind of that situation where I'm not really hit too much by noise except for the little turboprops going over, and they're kind of fun to watch. But I've been down in the parts of town where it's impossible to go down during the day. But anyway, both of them could have the same standard, and one would be hitting a big expense, and the other couldn't afford this house.
Well, Councilmember Caldwell, I think what you've illustrated on is the kind of the policy question we're asking, number 8, where under situations like that, we allow the building official to kind of waive any requirements.
My feeling is there should be a certain amount of where you can take care of it in special situations. The point was brought up, like Sea-Tac. Well, Sea-Tac has Angle Lake there. If you're in the far side of the Angle Lake, you're getting the same noise you are in the airport side of Angle Lake, because the sound travels across water, almost unvented. And so they say a certain discretionary value should be given in either sense.
Oh, so you're, okay. Jeanette?
Okay. I'm wondering if Councilmember Pina's concern might be assisted if we propose having the whole thing advisory and then have a long comment period, or send it to different people that might come back and say, oh, but what about this or what about that? I think that would give us something to work from and then get their comments.
When do we anticipate, assuming that we came to consensus on a number of elements tonight, when do we anticipate an ordinance coming back to us?
Sometime later this spring. We don't have a specific date, but it
And there would
depends
be
on.
and there would be a public hearing held, correct?
I don't think it's required. I don't think on Title 14 we're required to have a public hearing, but we could certainly have a public hearing if that's what council wanted to do. But it would be open council discussion.
Right, okay. Carmen and then Melissa.
I guess my question is, do we know which map we're trying to talk off of? If it's the most recent one that's projecting later, nothing that's inside of our city limits is more than 65.
That's correct.
There's quite a bit that's 60, and certainly 60 ought to be advisory. But if we're talking about the map that's current, then still most of the city is 65, and this part is 70. So we've got this much that maybe would be the more stringent part we're talking about if we're staying with the current map. I think it partly needs to be parts of North Hill have very few trees and sit up very high and pick up a lot more noise than other parts of town. And I'm thinking whenever they do get done with their new noise work, which I think they're doing, they may revise the part of our map that shows that part of North Hill. And that would be the most heavily impacted.
I would propose that if we write a code that says it is advisory, that it always point to something that has been adopted. And it would point to the most recently adopted noise contour map. So it would be the larger one that we would be following, and then when it shrunk down, we would follow accordingly. But that doesn't happen for a couple more years.
Okay.
So we are using the old map. And
Again, that's the most current,
okay. And anything
recently
below
adopted map.
65, we're taking it away? 65 is advisory, and 70 is maybe where it's more stringent?
The consensus I heard is advisory with boundaries without a consensus on what the boundaries should be yet. Because you have part potential required or mandatory has been talked about. You've had people who've talked about the noise contour. You've had people talk about north of Kent Des Moines Road. So I don't see a consensus yet on that. So, Melissa?
With the exception of multifamily, have the residential housing in the 75 and 70 areas, were those the homes that got the port packages?
The ones that were within the 65 were supposed to get it, and almost all of them have. There are a few holdouts, and the story we were told is there's a few people out there that just don't trust the government. And they
So,
didn't want to allow the government to do anything on their house.
so
And
do we have language in the existing code that if someone makes an improvement like in kind to the existing element in their home, it has to be as good? So if they've got the port package triple pane windows, and now they're going to add on, would the windows that they were putting into the add-on have to match the windows that are already in the home?
They would have to meet the requirements of the sound code, whether or not they're exactly the same as the ones they have in their building, doesn't matter. It just needs to meet the sound transmission code, correct?
Not quite, sir. There was built in a little bit of relief for kitchens, additions not over 500 square feet if it wasn't a sleeping room. Sleeping rooms always get treated. There was some relief to, again, put on additions for bathrooms, kitchens, other things within a certain amount that provide relief to that.
Okay.
I guess my thought being that if somebody was to make an improvement in the areas that, in the noise contours of the 1998 map that already got the port packages, they would match the stringent sound code that we have because they would be matching what was already in their homes.
Okay, well, we haven't even gotten to the homes
Yeah.
new
Remodel.
versus remodels yet.
Right.
So, Matt?
After hearing the points from my colleagues, I'd accept advisory.
Base, is there a consensus on a boundary?
Area 1?
I say we just stick with Area 1.
So just north of Kent Des Moines Road? Okay, so there's consensus for
Okay.
advisory north of Kent Des Moines Road.
And since it's advisory, all the other policy questions are moot. There's no need to talk about should the official be given discretion, because now you're not requiring that higher level, and he does not have discretion, much discretion, he has some, in the code when it comes to performance-based things.
Now, what about new homes versus remodels?
I would argue should be advisory for any type of project that's being done in the city, since it's not mandatory, that it would be, we advise anyone who's doing a remodel north of Kent Des Moines Road that they may want to think about doing a higher level of sound transmission improvement.
Is that, I was under the impression that if you had, okay, so Melissa talked about additions and so forth, but, excuse me, if I go ahead and replace a window or decide to put in a sliding glass door where I had a window and that's already been treated, my understanding by the agreement that I signed, and I'd appreciate it if the city would clarify that, is that I would still have to put in, if I put in a sliding glass door where there was a window, the sliding glass door would have to meet the standard of what I put in based on what I signed. Is that a misimpression?
I think he's talking about if you signed the agreement with the port and they paid for
They
the
paid,
package,
yes, they
that
did.
you wanted to replace when they say, you know, something
My
went,
understanding that the agreement you signed with the port is that if they treat your home and spend this money, you're going to agree not to sue them for sound. That's the agreement. I don't believe it's any more than that. And just very quickly, we've always used some discretion. If you have a single door or window that's broken, you get to change that glazing out without any permit. Everybody gets to do that thing. It was, generally speaking, the whole home that was done or treated.
Yeah, Dan?
Yeah. Okay, one thing that kind of strikes me, on this discretionary value, what is this going to do to the time element clearing so they can make their building? Clearing through us or clearing through you direct?
Well, any new construction that's subject to a building permit has to come in for a plan check, and in conjunction with our plan check, we would develop kind of an advisory bulletin. We'd staple it to the and provide it in terms of our plan review comments. They would kind of acknowledge that they'd received this advice from us, and we'd move forward. So there is a mechanism by which kind of we would ensure that they got the advice.
I'm not sure how long it takes to clear the question through the commission here. But it maybe came up as a questionable item.
how long it takes to complete a plan check so we can?
Now, I walk into your office today. Do I expect 2 weeks reply or 2-day reply?
Well, very good, sir. For a new single-family dwelling, we've set a new goal that we're just working on set. Roughly would be 6 weeks. That's to pass all the departments to go out, sir, depending on if we get a quality plan.
So to review, it sounds like we've covered all the policy issues, but just to review, we've decided to deal with this now rather than later. We've decided to eliminate Area 2. We've decided, or consent, again, this is by consensus, and when we actually vote on it, that, should Area 1's southern boundary move from 252nd to Kent Moines Road, there's agreement for that, consensus for that. And should the code be advisory and not mandatory, and there is consensus with that, with the boundary being north of the Kent Moines Road. And I think that's it. Carmen?
I just want to make one comment and see if I'm accurate or not. On the noise insulation map that the houses were actually insulated by the airport on, with the colors being the same as our older map here, everything that was in 65 was able to get the standard insulation. And my house was in that area, and I know that the port paid $30,000 to do that to my house, and my house was not one of the biggest ones around. In the next darker area, that was custom insulation. So it wasn't just new houses or houses less than, it was everything, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Excuse me.
So everything on the older map that's 65 LDN or darker has been insulated by the port. Up to what, 98% of the houses that were qualified, or?
They're currently going through that now, and.
Yeah, but it was just a very, very few that didn't do
There's a
it.
small handful of homes
Yeah.
that, again, like I said, for some reason, the owners did not want to allow that to happen.
But it was a very small number of people.
I can't remember the number we were quoted. I think it's less than 25.
Okay. So I'm trying to say that the boundaries that the port used are important boundaries because everything within them has been brought up to very good standards. And I don't think we should ignore that those boundaries indicate a differentiation in what has happened to everything within the boundaries.
And the only comment I'll make in rebuttal to that is that's true for single-family homes, but for
Right.
multifamily homeowners, that is not true.
That's true. But most of the multifamily is either Kent Des Moines Road or 216th or 99.
There's a lot off of 24th Avenue South, there's a lot
Okay. But I would.
on 216th, there's a lot
I
on-
think multifamily deserved it too. I don't see that, but.
Yeah,
and
yes,
it didn't
they
happen.
did.
Right.
Yes, they did.
But are we trying to say now that if a new single family happens in an area where everybody has great insulation, they don't have to have it?
Yes.
Yes.
Unless it falls within the port's footprint, and the port and the FAA are obligated to provide the option of that insulation, we are not mandating it. We're making it advisory. That is correct.
Your Honor, I don't think our municipal code requires us to have a public hearing. We could certainly plan to have a public hearing if that's the will of the council on this. As it comes back.
I think this is a significant change, and that the perspectives of the individuals who may be impacted by it need an opportunity to be able to speak to it. And because it's probably the most significant change relative to their personal home, or potential homes going forward. So is there agreement on that? Do a public hearing?
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. All right, we will take a 10-minute break and then come back for item number 2. Okay, back from our break and just in time for an executive session regarding pending litigation per RCW 42.30.110 sub 1. And that will be for 30 minutes. Suburban Cities Association support of governor's petition to federal government regarding change in classification of marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 substance. And Tony.
I'll make this short and sweet. The Suburban Cities Public Issues Committee will be meeting next Wednesday, and a question will be put to them as to whether or not suburban cities should take a position on this particular issue. Mayor Pro Tem Pina is your representative to pick, and he needs to know how he should vote on this particular issue. And then I'll give you the 30-second version of what the issue is. Marijuana as a Schedule 1 drug is not allowed to be, by federal law, to be prescribed or possessed or used by anyone in the country. If it were a Schedule 2 drug, it would be like any other that could be prescribed and possessed and used just like any other drug you would get at the pharmacy. Governor Gregoire, along with Governor Chafee of Rhode Island, has made a formal petition to the federal government to make that change. And there are some of the suburban cities who think it's a good idea and want suburban cities to support that petition.
Okay. Melissa and Jeanette.
I move to direct Mayor Pro Tem Pina to vote in support of the Suburban Cities Association, supporting the petition of Governor Gregoire and Chafee asking the federal government to reclassify marijuana from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 2 drug.
I second the motion.
Motion made and seconded. Discussion. Melissa.
Having two teenagers in the house, this has kind of been a point of conversation all week, and I think it was when you reminded me of the old analogy of the truck that gets stuck in the tunnel and they pull all the engineers out and everyone's trying to figure out how to rebuild the tunnel to get the truck out. And one of the kids says, why don't you just let some air out of the tires? And so as I was battling with this, my daughter was like, well, wouldn't it be like if you're driving somewhere and you have somebody's bottle of pain pills in your purse, but it's not your bottle of pain pills and you get in trouble for that? Wouldn't it kind of be the same thing? And I'm like, yeah, it would. So I think just, when a kid looked at it and simplified it for me, I was like, and just reading through how regulated our pharmaceutical industry is, it did make sense on so many levels.
And I guess it would be, you need to remember things like cocaine and morphine are Schedule 2 drugs. If you don't have a prescription for them, it is illegal for you to possess them. If this change were made, then marijuana would be treated the same way.
Mm-hmm. Jeanette.
Yes, I did want to mention my sister died of cancer about a year ago, and she and a lot of other cancer patients not only have the pain, but also appetite problems with the treatment. And her husband started calling me the soup Nazi because I was the only one that could get her to eat for a while, because that's all she could eat was a thin soup. And so anyway, I think it's important that we support this, what is it called, a petition.
Are there any other comments from the council? The only thing I would say is this: the amount of money, time, and effort that, we keep getting squeezed for resources, and there are a lot better things that our officers could be doing on behalf of our constituents that are getting distracted by the lack of regulation on something that could be well regulated at a different level. And for that reason, I would commend this. With that, all those in favor of the motion, raise your hand and say aye.
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 Opposed?
I think I'll be opposed.
Okay. Motion passes 5-1.
I have direction, thank you.
Okay. Last item on the agenda for tonight is city council process. And I worked up a This was another one of those things that the council indicated at our retreat back in January that we wanted to take a look at. And it's always good to go back and take a look at the way that the council does business. Every once in a while, depending upon the makeup of the council, they've looked at particular elements of it, but I thought we'd come up with a little more structured approach, more global, take a look at a lot of the different issues that have been talked about, and see if there's any proposed changes or not that we choose to pursue. And the first thing is meetings, days and times. Are there any thoughts about whether or not we should change the days of the week or the times in which we meet? Melissa and then Matt.
I came from running nonprofit meetings for homeowners associations. And one big movement in the industry is to no longer have nighttime meetings and instead require their boards of directors to meet earlier in the day. The thought process being, how good are our decision-making skills after we've already put in a full day of work, we've gotten home, we've done our home stuff, and now we roll in to a 7 o'clock, 7:30 meeting where we're making potentially, multi-million-dollar decisions. And we're tired, and staff is tired, and we're looking at the clock, and so Matt and I have, for the last 2 years, been discussing maximizing our efforts by, if we started our meetings at 6 or 6:30 instead of 7:30, it not only would give us more time to the stickier situations to work through them in the course of one meeting, but it also may get us and staff out of here at a more reasonable time, whether it be 8:30 or 9:30, and I think have a little bit sharper decision-making skills in the process. So I would fully be in support of, as far as day of the week goes, I don't have a preference, but I would like to see us really seriously consider starting our meetings earlier.
Okay. Matt?
As Melissa noted, we have talked about this for a while. I actually have some thoughts about the days as well as the time. For a variety of reasons, I like the idea of a 6:30 start time. I think it does give the opportunity for a committee to meet maybe between 5:30 and 6:30. It may change their frequency or whatever, but I think it still gives you an opportunity to handle that. The day, I might be wrong because I don't know all of what our local, what our sister cities council meeting times are, but to my knowledge, we're the only one that meets on Thursday. And, to have the opportunity to have a day during the week where you could meet with your colleagues from another location or whatever would be helpful. The Suburban Cities does have Wednesday, so does the school board. Since we're active on Suburban Cities, unless we didn't meet the week that Suburban Cities did, which is also an opportunity, Wednesday might be a little bit of a challenge, but I think we should give consideration to maybe if we have things happen in a similar time frame in terms of days of the week. There's some cons to that as well, but I think a 6:30 start time would also be a little easier on staff. I like to believe that you're going to be here late at night, so it's 9:45 right now, so you probably came in about 2 o'clock this afternoon, right? Yeah, that doesn't work that way. So
I was here at 8:30.
well, that's my point, is that somebody has to open up City Hall, right? But
Dan?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I believe the Thursday night meeting is handy. It's been customary for I don't know how many of those years, but it's a time you can keep up with. And if you split it down, you've got that whole day kind of meeting Monday morning and Thursday night next week and what have you. It's hard to keep follow. But Thursday nights is a good time to meet. And generally during the daytime, these daytime meetings are when they conduct business where they don't want the public present because they're working in many organizations. So I would prefer to remain at the time we're having it presently.
Okay. Jeanette?
I would go for starting the meetings at 7 o'clock, but I wouldn't be able to to be able to go to a 5:30 starting committee meetings. So I think 7 o'clock would work for me, and I'd like the Thursdays. We could go visit other councils if we wanted to, and some of them have come to see us recently.
Right. Carmen, any thoughts?
I'm fine with everything I've heard so far. I don't have a problem with whether it be 6:30 or 7 or which night.
My thoughts, I think Thursday night is actually a good night. It does allow us to go attend other council meetings and other committees, and we can do things jointly with them periodically too, if we're either them coming to our meeting, or it provides more options in terms of being able to get together with them in a public forum to actually talk about some policy issues. I agree with the evening meeting times because both for council and for the general public, being here to be able to see what's going on live, there's a balancing act between too early and too late. If we maintain committees, it doesn't necessarily allow for enough meeting time before. It may require more meetings or meetings on different nights in order to accommodate that if we shift earlier. So I wouldn't, if we moved it earlier, I wouldn't want it to be any earlier than 7 o'clock. I'm comfortable with 7:30. I don't know if there's a consensus on a change for the meeting times, and it sounds like Thursdays are generally good for that, but.
You know, maybe if we want to try an adjustment, maybe just adjust it by 30 minutes and go to 7 o'clock. I do think, I just think it's a little easier on folks, because right now we go from 7:30 to 10:30 unless there's an extension, so it's 7 to 10 would, I guess, be the window. And I just feel like the later it gets, the less likely we're going to have people who come to see us, especially if they end up wanting to speak on an item that we don't cover until later in the agenda. Another thing I think we could do to kind of manage that time zone is maybe not have executive sessions in the middle of the meeting or at the beginning of the meeting, but move them to the end. We lost them all tonight.
It depends on the nature of what we have, but.
It does.
So is there a consensus for Thursdays at 7 o'clock, moving it up by half an hour?
Yeah.
Okay, now, unless I'm mistaken, this is in city code, so it would require an ordinance to do, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
The council rule says you will meet at the time noted in
The
the ordinance.
Okay, very good. Committee meetings and public access. By committee meetings, what I meant by that was the days that you meet. It seems fairly flexible now, and it should be. The important aspect to it, though, is making sure that the public has access to it. This was actually brought up in the retreat by some staff, as well as just, the opportunity for people to come in. If they want to hear what the discussion is in public safety and transportation, or in finance and economic development, or what have you, they should have the opportunity to be able to do that. Being in the back room doesn't provide for that. So maybe what I really was getting at is the venue, whether it's meeting back there or meeting out here, somewhere at least where public access can be facilitated for the committee meetings if there's an interest in attending. Are there any thoughts on that, either on the issue of when committees are held? I think we're pretty flexible on that. I don't think.
Yeah, I think you are right on there.
Yeah, but in terms of just the public access piece of any thoughts, Carmen?
Well, that's the only thing I've noticed, is that occasionally I'm here a little bit earlier, and people will not know what door to come to, and the doors will all be locked, and there will be nobody nearby to notice that there's anybody at the door. And I think that's really the only problem, is figuring out how to have a certain door identified as the right one to come to, and somebody being around to let them in. Otherwise, I don't think we have any hindrances to people being able to attend.
So if there was a sign or something that pointed to the right place.
Or ring this bell if there's a way to do that, or,
Yeah. Matt?
The thing I struggle with is the conference room behind here. I mean, the reality is, you put the staff and the three members of the committee around the table, and, well, tonight we had the PS&T, and I mean, that room was full. So it's really not inviting to the public. I look at those two tables back in the back, and maybe we could just wrap chairs around them and have the meeting back there, so it wouldn't be as formal as that of a dais, but it'd just be in the room. It's open, the door be unlocked, people could come in, sit down, and listen, or not.
Now, the only challenge to that is that the court has use of this facility as well, and there's evening court, and there are other times where the use of this room can be
The
conflicts.
The municipal court rarely meets in the evening, but there is the juvenile court that meets here once a month, I think, on Tuesday. Every Tuesday? Every Tuesday.
So again, if it's a meeting before a council meeting or something like that, we have the opportunity. I think it is more inviting to have something out here in,
I think it needs to be around a good table surface, because so often there are a lot of papers and sometimes some very large graphics and drawings and maps to be looked over by each of us. So this wouldn't work well at all.
No, I was talking about the back table there. You just turn chairs in around that. We'd also have a projector in this room, so people could move away from paper. It's a concept.
Can we eat in here?
At that table, you probably could. So I don't know.
Are there any issues staff-wise in terms of holding committee meetings in here?
My concern would be, oftentimes between 7 and 7:30, staff is making sure that their presentations are ready to go. Sometimes we are putting things up on easels or posting them on the wall here because we need them for council discussion. And the public is starting to filter in, and they may or may not be interested in what the committee is talking about, but having people kind of hanging around and in the area that aren't listening to what the committee is talking about can feel a little bit disruptive. So I'd be a little bit concerned about having the committee meetings in here right before the council meeting. We could switch to the southern conference room for all the committee meetings. We could have the outside door there open, and we could prop up the other one, and as people are coming in, we could have a sign that points them a committee meeting this way.
Don't we have some nights where we have two committee meetings going, though, that there's a committee on the south and one
Very
on the
rarely.
north? Okay.
Very rarely. The way we have committees set up right now is 3 of them meet on the 3 Thursdays, and then the 4th one meets on a Tuesday once a month.
And occasionally, if there's a second meeting, for example, we had a second S&T meeting, but I believe one committee met in the South Conference Room and we met in the North Conference Room. So conceivably, that could be accommodated. So does it sound like using the South Conference Room would accommodate the?
It still is a concern over capacity for the room.
The other option then would be to find another room in another building to have those kind of meetings. Police Department has a large public meeting room right off the lobby. It's accessible. Not as much parking up there, but
Well, it also gets to having to truncate the meetings so that council members could be here in time for a 7:30 or 7 o'clock start.
you need it.
So, okay, Pat.
I like the idea of the police department because they have a lock so that you can't enter the police department. If you have people coming through that door, a lot of us keep my purse and all that sitting in my office, and mine can lock, but they're all along the south side of the building. People have personal items, and so it's just a security issue. But with police, you walk into the conference room, you can access the bathrooms, but you can't access the police department.
And that presumes that they don't have anything going on there, there are no community things going on.
They occasionally have community and night meetings going on there, but if we get on the schedule and say, these Tuesday evenings, it's ours.
Any thoughts on that, using the police training room?
It's close but far away.
I'm open to trying things. I'm not, I don't, that wouldn't, where we hold the meeting probably isn't a matter of policy anywhere. I'm open to trying something.
Carmen?
Oftentimes, the meeting breaks up just barely in time to walk over here and be at this meeting. And this is the 7th year that I've been on the council in this stretch. I've never seen more than 5 or 6 people at the most show up as guests. And I've never felt that there wasn't enough room in both the North and the South Conference Room during those occasions. They just sit on chairs next to the wall. They're not part of the meeting, they're listening. Although we do occasionally notice that somebody wants to say something and we invite them to. But I have never felt that it was too limiting to do it in the two conference rooms that we typically use.
Melissa and Jeanette.
I guess that would be my question too, is the point of this conversation that we're having an overwhelming response from the community that they want to have access to these meetings, but they can't, or they can't find us, or are we trying to encourage more participation from the community? I mean, I'm wondering, are we trying to fix a problem that we're not really having?
I put this on here for discussion. If you don't feel that it's an issue, then there's no reason for us to necessarily make a change. But it's opening up an opportunity for us to have a conversation if we want to encourage it or if we want to make it more inviting for people. If people have been trying and we haven't heard about it,
Right.
you know. But, Jeanette?
I'd like to see the committee meetings still held in the North Conference Room, but have signs so that access is easy for the public if they do want to come.
Okay.
I like that too.
Is there consensus for that then?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Study sessions versus regular council meetings. Regular council meetings have a laundry list of things that, you know, that you cover at every meeting. Study sessions allow for more in-depth discussions like we've had tonight, and generally you make no decisions on the night of a study session, substantive decisions in terms of ordinances and resolutions. There's one idea that was floated out there was make everything a regular council meeting. What's the distinction? And the only real difference is what you put on the agenda or don't put on the agenda. On the other hand, the idea of study session allows you to be able to focus on just a select number of issues and be able to concentrate on them. By designating a study session, you're sending a message to the public that you're focusing on something. Is there a preference for keeping what we have or making things uniform, or Matt and Dan, or Dan and Matt?
I'm going to move that we accept the balance of the agenda here as is, because this is the same agenda we had from last year. And just keep it as is with the changes we made. Otherwise, we'll be here till 2 o'clock in the morning.
Well, we're not going through the full rules and procedures. We're just going down the.
Okay.
You know. No, I think we'll get through here pretty quick.
Yeah, okay.
Quick comment about study sessions. I think it's, the way I've always differentiated them is on a regular meeting is where a council actually chooses to take action on a number of things. And on a study session, we truly that's where we get to interact with staff and learn and gather information. It gives the staff more time than in a quick presentation to try and keep, at a regular meeting. I think they're very effective, and I'd like to keep the study session principle.
Consensus on that? Okay. All right. Next, meeting agendas. How an agenda is decided upon. There are items that are brought to council that staff have that are part of the regular schedule of things that we need to we're required to do at certain points of the year. For example, we have to take up for consideration the transportation improvement plan that we submit to the state. At a certain time, we take up amendments to our comprehensive plan, which only can be done once a year. The budget obviously has to be passed by December 31st every year. So there's a number of things that are driven strictly by things that we're obligated to do. There are other things that, based upon what we've set out as priorities, we pursue as well. And that's really what drives the agenda. When things are put on the agenda, or making sure that the things that we prioritized are on there, based on the rules that we have, has been left to the mayor to work in conjunction with the city manager to make sure that those things are getting taken care of. So that's the current process. Is there any suggestion on changing that? And what the rules do also allow, if there are 3 council members that want to see an item on the agenda, they can request to have it put on the agenda. So, Melissa?
I don't have any changes to the way the agenda is decided upon, but I do like that you're including more information on the futures moving out forward, so we're able to kind of look at futures and know ahead of time, is there a topic that either we have a passion about or we don't understand, so we want more information about. And just in the last month, I just have really applauded this council's efforts at getting questions before staff before we've come to the dais. So I think that as far as how the agenda is decided upon, I think that's always been kind of the mayor's task to be on top of that, and I would continue to support that. But I do like the additional information on the futures. I think it's a great communication tool to our community. It's a great kind of barometer for the staff, and I think it helps us as a council know kind of what topics are coming up if we've talked to our constituents, if we've got, community members that we know, for example, the zoning changes on the North Hill, that we knew that there were people up in that neighborhood that were going to be concerned about it, so we make sure that people are kind of aware of what's going on. So
I thank you for the kind words, because I sat down with Tony and said, here's how much time is it going to take for staff to come back with things to address the things that we set out as priorities for the year. So I wanted to make sure staff, and that we had it on the agenda as far out as possible, and work around the vacation schedules and everything that council members have. And I agree, seeing it in advance, that we're going to get to it. We know we're going to have that conversation on those issues, and they were the things that we collectively chose that were priorities. So, but is there anybody like to change, or Jeanette?
Just on what should be included in agenda item materials. Usually they're pretty clear, but there was the traffic one recently where it would have been nice to have a summary, more like a brief summary of what it was that they were asking us to fund. And also the fiscal impact. It's always there somewhere, but like Dan was saying, it might be good to have it near the top. I noticed on one thing that Dan was looking at, it had fiscal something at the bottom, and then the number was actually on the next page. But so if it was just right up front, I think it would help.
So potentially a change to the format, to the cover page for the agenda items that kind of
Summarize the cost.
Summarize.
Cost and the personnel involved. How many?
In many cases, that's done. We just want to bubble it up to the top, make it just a little more visible.
Right.
And I don't have a problem rearranging the order of material. I mean, after all, it is your material. We just put it together for you. And in regards to a little bit more information about some of the things that come to council, I agree with you on that one in particular. And sometimes I think we as staff and you as council, then when you've been on the council for a while, you get into the habit of, I know what that's about. I don't need a summary statement about it. And then we forget that some people this is the first time they've seen this and they have no idea what it is we're talking about. So in that particular example, a quick summary of here's the 3 big items that this contract amendment is going to do, and then add page 22 of the scope of work for a more detailed description. Talk to Grant about that, and we just need to be a little bit more careful to make sure that we're providing you good information.
Matt?
Well, since we've taken this block, and I'm fine taking these things as a block, I have recently had the opportunity to observe a couple other councils, and they don't read the consent agenda because it's published on the web and it's available to them. And as much as I know that Sandy really likes reading that in.
Especially the VIN numbers, right?
Yeah, yes. And you really do have a great radio voice that, you nice tones and everything. It's really nice. But is it really something we should spend council time doing? If we don't need to, I'm fine with us not doing it.
No, and in fact, once the motion's made, if someone wants to pull something for discussion, it can happen anyways, more in depth. I see no reason to read the consent agenda. Is there consensus not consensus not to read the consent agenda. Say that 10 times fast.
Everybody's looking at me. Well, we've all probably read it at home. I'm always highlighting the things that matter to me, so when it comes up, yes, I would bring it up if there was something highlighted that I thought needed to be discussed.
Okay, so no longer read the consent agenda.
And it is available on the agenda that the public that's here can get, correct?
And
It's also
online.
available online.
Right. Right. So it's not as if it's not available to look at the pieces of it, it's just, we're just not going to read, yeah. So-
And we are moving toward getting the entire packet in electronic form so it can be posted on the website. People can follow along when they are watching the video the next day. And we can download it onto whatever sort of computer type technology we decide to use when we get that figured out. So I think that's an excellent idea.
On the structure of the agenda and the order of the agenda items, is everyone comfortable with that? I think the flow is generally, the consent, the reports, the old items, the new items. Someone talked about possibly moving the reports to the end. Honestly, the public may not sit to the end of the meeting. I think they need to be heard up front. I think they need to any acknowledgments that we do as part of the, all those reports, I think it makes sense to me to keep the order the same. Yeah.
I would think that whenever, and we do this a lot, but whenever there are guests in the audience, that we should try to have them not sit through a lot of other items while they wait for their turn, particularly if we're going to go in the back room to an executive session for a while, to be very, very thoughtful about not making people wait more than they need to.
Well, ironically, tonight was the exception. I would have done the executive session at the end, but I had a request to actually move it up. So, and actually that'll play out pretty well. But I agree. If there are people here, I think not making them wait is the best thing, unless it's related to an item that's actually on the agenda for which we have to take action. For example, let's say there's a resolution of a court case on a settlement, and it requires our buy-off as a strategy first before we come out here and take formal action on authorizing, the resolution. So some things like that do require interruption, but for the most part, those things can be planned in advance.
And Lori just reminded me of one issue that we have talked about, and that is when we do have public hearings. Right now, we note them that they will be held during the meeting that starts at 7:30. So people don't know, does that mean it's going to be at 7:30, 7:45, 8 o'clock, 8:30, or whatever? So you could add in your rules that when we have a public hearing, that we will specify the time that hearing will start. So no matter where you're at in your agenda, let's say you have, for example, a lot of comments from the public and council members have a lot of reports to provide, and it's 8:15, and that's when the public hearing is supposed to be held, and we haven't even done consent calendar yet. We stop everything, we do the public hearing, and then we pick up where we were at.
Is there consensus for that?
Yeah.
I think so.
That way, people know at 8:15, the item I care about on the public hearing is going to be heard.
Well, or as an alternative to consider, if you start the thing is, if you start the meeting at 7:30 and you're going to have a public hearing, I guess I would try and do it as close to 7:30 as possible.
You mean 7 o'clock?
7 o'clock, exactly. I mean 7 o'clock. Thank you for that correction. But my point is, it's just that when you post a meeting time and you know that you're going to put something on the agenda that will draw special interest or testimony or something, I think we ought to just put that stuff up front. And I think we ought to save execs and things like that.
So let me kind of ask a modify of that. What I would suggest is then you start the meeting as you normally do. You have comments from the public where people can come up and talk about anything, and then after that is public hearings, and then you get into everything else.
I think it's something that needs to be, I think there needs to be flexibility, honestly. I think there's a cadence to the meetings, and sometimes the council gets on a roll, and you want to get through a certain amount of things before you take up an issue like that. And then there are other times where, because of the volume of people who want to testify, you want to start it earlier. I think that needs to be flexible. So I'm not sure. It's okay to specify a time, but I think necessarily say it's the first item or whatever, that I think is problematic.
My intent was just to have it as early in the night as possible.
Perhaps go back on one subject just a bit. On the executive sessions, many organizations have the executive sessions before the starting time. Like if we had started at 7:30, but had the executive session at 7, then we'd have the schedule on, and we're not in trouble with the auditor.
We've done that before, but an executive session that is held in advance of the council meeting is considered a special meeting and has to be noticed
Separately.
Okay.
So that's one of the
And
reasons.
we've occasionally done that, but it also gets in the way of our committee meetings as well.
Right.
Okay.
Carmen?
As a way of more people finding it easier to check back on something we've dealt with, I noticed over in Port Townsend that their council meetings, when they go onto the web to see the meeting, it's like an outline form for, you don't have to watch through 2 or 3 hours of meeting to get what you wanted to see. They've got item 1, item 2, and you can click on whichever item is of interest to you. I think that would cause a great many more people to more readily find what they need to know and want to know and pay more attention to what we're dealing with. I don't know how they did it, but I know they did do it.
Well, that's a technology issue, and we'd have to talk with the gentleman in the back who's recording and see how we can figure out how we can do that. So Reed will be talking later.
The last thing under the meeting agendas is when the agenda and council packets made available to council. Council packets are due to us the Friday before a regular meeting and 3 days before a study session, is that right?
No, I think it's both the Friday before.
Both the Friday before. Is everybody comfortable with that? That gives you, typically, because we've got a Thursday meeting, gives you the weekend to be able to review it and gives us essentially a week in advance. So everybody's okay with it?
The only point I made in the agenda item I put together is we say, except in an emergency, but we haven't defined what an emergency means. So if you would like to, we could entertain a definition of emergency for that purpose, where it's an item that needs council direction before the next meeting would be scheduled.
I'd rather leave it undefined and more flexible depending upon the circumstances, so.
We just say it's open for abuse.
Absolutely.
By you.
Yeah, sure.
But certainly not by anyone on this council.
But also the courts are very flexible in they let the legislative bodies determine what emergency means.
Okay.
To too great an extent.
That's good, yeah. Hopefully, we don't have to use that. Okay, council policy review structure, we've had policy committees, and they've actually had 4 defined policy committees for a number of years. Some councils, for example, Sea-Tac, dumped their committee structure and went to a committee of the whole. Now, there's pluses and minuses to both. The pluses to the committee structure versus the committee of the whole are essentially that you have set committees where the issues get vetted well before it gets to the full council. So if there are questions, if there's additional homework that needs to be done, additional research, alternatives, that is essentially staff's being able to do that work. That creates additional work for staff. That's one of the drawbacks to it. And the issues wind up getting re-vetted to the entire council. Now, the difference, though, is you have half the council who's been educated to the issue to help educate the remaining 4 members of the council as to the discussion that occurred, why certain things were looked at, or why certain directions were recommended, or what have you. The advantage of the committee of the whole is the entire council is hearing the entire thing. The problem, though, is that because of the necessity for staff to do the homework and do the follow-up that would otherwise occur in committee, more council time is being taken up on the same policy issue. It may take 2 or 3 meetings to come to a resolution on a particular policy issue that may have been vetted otherwise in a committee a couple times before it got to council. And the amount of our time collectively, or corporate time, in terms of being able to deal with policy issues, on all issues gets reduced because we're spending more time on specific issues. So I guess the first question is, would you want to continue the current policy committee, the committee structure that we have, or handle things as a committee of the whole?
I think your first suggestion, policy committees, is a good idea. Because it gives, like you said, could get confused in the committee as a whole going through. Because you're going to have controversial issues, regardless of what they are, from time to time. But the policy committees would go through it first, hammer out the problems, and probably answer the problems, and then get through the main manifesto.
Carmen?
I feel very comfortable with the way it is. I think each of us picks committees that we'd like to be on, that we have a special interest in. We perhaps develop more background and ask more in-depth questions, which would be very hard to do if all 7 of us were trying to respond to the same thing at once. I trust those who are on the Transportation Committee and the Environment Committee and other things. I like it this way.
Is there consensus for that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the next question is subject matter of the policy committees. Now, the other challenge is when you're talking about 7 people, you can't really add too many more committees between driving staff crazy and ourselves crazy trying to staff, have enough people on enough committees. Sometimes it's a challenge just with the 4 committees we have. But it begs the question of the subject matter. Are the 4 committees that we have now, which are environment, finance and economic development, public safety and transportation, and municipal facilities, the right policy committees? Should there be different ones? Should there be different scope? I happen to think that they do a good job of covering things. And then when there are specific needs, such as reviewing interlocal agreements, franchise agreements, the ad hoc committee on franchise agreements, and I know there's a laundry list of those that probably need to be looked at some point in time, serve those purposes on a specific basis. So is everybody comfortable with the subject matters that we've got defined for the committees, the roles? Okay.
And I think we're all pretty good, too, that there are sometimes issues that'll overlap, like we'll have something in municipal facilities that we'll think, this would probably really be better over with the Economic Development Committee, and I think staff does a pretty good job of recognizing as we're heading down those trails and saying, hey, let's take this over to that committee instead.
Okay. And then the last piece of it, and this has been, I think our rules require now that the issues are referred to the committee, unless I'm mistaken. We didn't change the rules on this, but it's the council that sends the issues to the committee. Now, there have been issues that have come up that the committees have actually taken the initiative on. For example, Public Safety and Transportation started looking at all the issues regarding marijuana starting last year. The council didn't send that to committee, but it was obvious based upon what was happening at the state level that it was something that needed to be looked at, which is why we started looking at the impacts of the initiative that was on the ballot or the bill that the governor had vetoed a large section of, and how that was going to impact us. So the question is, should the committees receive the topics or the subject matter not only based upon the prioritization that we do collectively as a council every year in terms of setting our strategic objectives, both in short and long term, or are there issues that should have a genesis within the committee, that there's something that's related to those areas that we're covering that should be brought up for discussion? Jeanette?
I think it'd be good if the committee themselves could take care as things come up, but that when that happens, they should notify the full council and not wait until they have the outcome of what they've been discussing, but just even let us know that it's on the discussion.
And part of that is just the sharing of the minutes from all the committee meetings, and staff will be emailing, when the minutes have been approved by each committee, that will be sent out to every one of the councils so that we're aware of everybody's.
But even in addition to that, I mean, you may not want to read every all the minutes from all the committees, but
If I could.
Sure, Matt?
The minutes, I will say, are at times a little sporadic, and we probably need to find a way to do a little better with that. And then the other thing is, I think it should be incumbent upon each committee chair, and I think we try and practice this, is when, under public comment, the first public meeting after a committee meeting, to either have the chair or the vice chair or whatever, make sure that we do report out what's happening in our committees, so we do create an awareness among council. I do think your point is correct, though. I think we need to do the best that we can to communicate walk-on items.
The only thing I would add there, though, is that whatever issues that get generated in committee should be unless they're emergent, should be secondary to the priorities we've collectively set for the year. Because otherwise, they just get in the way and they sap the resources of the committee and staff and essentially steer us off of what we've said we want to get done for the year. Does that sound reasonable? I don't know what changed to the rules.
Well, and I'm reading the rule right here. All it says is committees shall make a recommendation on proposed ordinances, resolutions, and motions within their area of responsibility before action is taken by the council.
So it may be broad enough already to...
I think it's broad enough, and
Okay.
Your comment about the minutes is spot on, and we have two committees where the minutes are getting regularly distributed to council, and a couple committees where they're not, and we will take care of that. But the other thing we did this year, which we haven't done in previous years, is put together a committee work plan for the year. So each committee now has a list of things it's going to be working on for the year. We need to make sure that's distributed to the full council. And if any individual council member sees an item on a committee list that he or she doesn't like, then I think you need to bring that up during a regular council meeting and say, I want to discuss why the committee is looking at this issue.
Like pigeons last.
Stop it.
Did we fix
No
that?
animals this year. No animals this year.
That was 2 years ago.
Oh.
It keeps flying back.
Pigeons, rabbits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Bob's not even here.
There you go. Okay. Leadership determination responsibilities. Process for selecting the mayor and mayor pro tem. It's pretty straightforward. A ballot is given out. Nominations are made for the people who are interested in running for the positions. And then each ballot has the name of the council member who's casting the vote. And you write in the person who is who you want to vote for, and then the clerk totals it up. Is there any suggestions on changing that process, or Matt?
The only point I want to make is I don't have a suggestion to change that process or any of the other bullets under leadership determination and responsibility. So in the interest of time, I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but I'm comfortable with how we determine the mayor and the mayor pro tem, determining committee chairs and liaison responsibilities.
Okay. Is everybody, and let me just ask, did everybody feel that I asked, not everybody got what they wanted, but did people feel that they were listened to and that their options were given consideration?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We don't have a way to impeach the mayor.
What's that?
We don't have a way to impeach the mayor.
Okay. Council compensation. Now, council's been compensated by the month. Has it always been that way, or was it monthly?
On a meeting.
Council's is by meeting.
Right.
And it changed to meeting versus month many years ago, and we had several employees of Boeing on the council. And Boeing will give employees time off during work time to attend to elected official duties as long as they're not paid a salary. And a monthly amount, no matter what it is, was considered a salary. So we called it the Terry Brazil rule. But it's been that way ever since. So council certainly is within its purview to change how the compensation works, but as you know, and you kind of hint at that with one of the questions here, when does that take effect? And you cannot change your own compensation. You can change a compensation for the next time there's an election. And since we have the election staggered, typically what ends up happening is half the council will be compensated one way, the other half will be the other way until you run through a full 4-year cycle.
Okay. Any thoughts?
The other way to deal with that is to establish a salary commission who sets your salary for you.
Are there any thoughts about month or meeting per meeting versus monthly?
I guess
Oh, Jeanette?
It might just be easier and then just to have it monthly, but I don't know.
The only other thing about going to monthly is that there is an actual filing fee based upon the salary for purposes of running for office as well.
But when
Which
you
means
get
that the citizens out there, as well as the council members, would have a filing fee, where now we don't because it's essentially a
I was going to
stipend.
make that point. Yep.
Melissa?
Well, and I'm not to be petty, but I guess I think you get paid for the time and effort you put into it, and I don't think we have a problem with the members of this council, but I could see there being the potential for abuse of, I'm going to get paid my, $500 this month whether I show up or not, so it's, I look at it like, you show up for 4 meetings that month.
It is the little carrot dangling out there to get you to come to the meeting.
How sick am I tonight? Yeah, no, I don't know, I look at it, but, the council members that put in the time and the effort and the energy and the commitment to the city, and somewhere down the road, we may have a council member who wouldn't, so.
Okay. Carmen?
I guess we get paid for 36 meetings a year How many?
40.
Oh, did that go up to 40? Okay. I was going to say, whenever the council starts talking about any changes, I think rather than a change upward in what we're paid, it might be to be paid for all the meetings if they happen to be more than 40. I thought they were still 36. I really haven't paid attention to what I get financially because that's not why I'm here. But I do know at one point it was like after the end of September, we weren't being paid because we'd used up all the meetings we were paid for.
We were at 36 for many years, and it was changed to 40 about 3 years ago.
Okay.
Jeanette?
Then I'd like to suggest changing it to 48, because I don't think I don't know if we need to have a maximum at all, but I think we should have as many as we need. And we should get paid for them throughout the year.
Is there support for, well, actually, we're almost at the end here, but Matt?
Well, if you need to extend, because just to wrap up this topic, I'll move, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'll move to extend the meeting
But I
by
can
10
have a
minutes.
second it.
A second it?
Yeah.
Okay. Then
There's been a motion to extend the meeting by 10 minutes and a seconded by, made by Mayor Pro Tem Pina, seconded by Councilmember Musser. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Believe it or not, you extended the meeting.
Okay, so can I talk about the compensation? Actually, I think the way things work right now, for a variety of the reasons that were made here, I think it works well. In terms of the next bullet, which should be when we should be compensated and when we should not, I think when there's a quorum and we're in public, and Tony, you've been very good about, differential, like when we had the public meetings and all of us were there. Again, we were engaged with the public. We had the full council. I think it was appropriate. So when we post that there is a public meeting and we are in attendance, then I think that's the meeting.
And we have been paying you for those.
Right.
Yes, you have. And I guess my only concern about the larger number is, frankly, in the time that I've been here, haven't exceeded the max. Okay? And now I've only been here a couple years. Okay, but it seems like the council is aware of the number of meetings and tried to put in a reasonable plan. I don't want to have this go too far because I want to make sure that our meetings are efficient and we are meeting when we need to, not more than we need to, and things like that.
Jeanette?
When I was on the council, and I may be mistaken, but it seemed like we met every week, and there was no maximum number. So, and if it goes to 48, that's still not 4 every month. So, and if we have issues where we don't want to stay till 10 or 10:30, I think it'd be better to break it up and have more meetings when we have a lot of things to discuss.
My perspective on this is, I was not supportive of going from 36 to 40. I think that the voters send us here to get a job done. Sometimes it requires more meetings. Sometimes there's other issues that come up, require our commitment and our time. Increasing the number of meetings means increasing our budget and our compensation for the year when we're looking at having to make cuts in other areas. You cannot increase or decrease your own council, or, council pay collectively, but you can voluntarily give up compensation. And I've been doing that for a number of years now because of our budgetary situation. I haven't made a public issue out of it till now. But I guess it's hard for me when we're in the process of deciding whether or not to keep a police officer or lay off a street maintenance person or whatever. I think we're in a difficult position to ask for additional compensation. And I understand wanting to be compensated for the additional time that we put in, which is why making the most productive use of the meetings that we do have makes a lot of sense. But I think we should leave it as is for now.
I agree.
So, still have
You can hit the next
a
one.
few minutes, believe it or not. We might get through this. Council rules of procedure. Suspension of the rules on 26A. I know, Jeanette, you brought this up before. It almost seems like rote that we suspend it. I think part of the reason that it happens so frequently is because things are pretty well vetted, either because half the council has seen the issue in committee and they've had that discussion, or because when we get out here, we've had a good discussion about it that allows for, it's not the first time we've seen it, there may have been it may seem by rote, but there may be other issues that do require additional. And having that there gives the majority on the council the option on whether or not, really this requires another meeting to be looked at and not looked at. And part of that comes out of the conversation or the debate or the discussion you're having that night. It's amazing somebody brings up something that, staff doesn't have an answer to it, and we really want to hear the answer before we go forward with it, so we won't suspend the rule, So I don't know that it's and it's the only rule that we can suspend currently. So I'm comfortable with it. I understand what you're saying. It almost seems like rote, but at least it provides it's an option there. And if we really think something needs more attention to it, we can not suspend the rule and just move whatever it is to the second reading on a date to be set. At least that's the way I feel. But I don't know what the rest of you think.
So I'll agree to leave it as it is, and then if there's some time I don't think we should suspend the rule, I'll just bring it up then.
Right.
And we've done that. We've had things that have come before us, and, we'll start looking at conflicting language, or one code doesn't match up with another code, and we'll all kind of look at each other and go, no, we're not going to suspend it. We do need to send it back and bring it forward again. So I think that we have that flexibility.
Okay. And are there any other rules you think we should have the option to suspend?
I was thinking of one on transportation, maybe to talk about it. Many of these buildings we're voting on, we've never seen them inside,
Oh,
like the beach park.
each part.
And,
Well, we'll be seeing the beach park.
Yeah.
So before we spend too much on it, we should look at what we got there.
Right.
And before we spend, not after.
Okay. And then Jeanette was kind enough to pick up some typos and some other things in our rules of procedure. And what I would recommend is this. Take a look at the rules of procedure. If you see typos that you've spotted as well, send them in. Let's collectively look at them, make sure, in fact, they are typos. If there are things that don't make sense, let's collect all of those, and then we'll take a meeting and go through our rules of procedure just from a process standpoint and make sure that we've cleaned up those odds and ends things. With all of that conversation, I think that we've come up with one change, probably an ordinance to change the meeting time.
Correct.
And the consent agenda,
Consent
not
agenda,
reading the
and-
consent agenda.
I was reading through that, just so you know. When we do that, we're still going to have to read the title of ordinances. Sure. Even if they're on the consent calendar. So some parts of it will still have to be read, but the vast majority will go away. And
I think a lot
And-
of typos are just human error or just show up, but they're visible. And I don't think they need too much work. I mean, like last week, we had
Right, but they still take
Mayor-
formal,
Mayor Schlichter.
right, but they still require formal adoption by the, right.
and then there was a,
There's actually a code section that allows the city clerk to make changes that are, that a minor correction to ordinance is submitted for filing that do not affect the sense, meaning, effect, or substance. And that's under, with the approval of the city attorney, and includes renumbering, relettering, capitalizing. But so that's by code, that we can make those minor corrections.
Right, but we're talking about our rules,
yeah, not an ordinance, they're talking about typos in the actual.
in our council rules.
We've got a
let's make them computer errors rather than typo errors.
And then there was a comment regarding public hearings.
Yes.
And that we'd have to go into the order of business and be more specific as to when public hearings are held.
Okay.
Did you want to keep that flexible? Because I noted that you want to have a more specific time for a public hearing on the agenda.
I don't think we would put that in the code. I think what we would do is we would just say that when we put it out to notice, we will have the public hearing at X time. I think just handle it that way.
Noted time.
Right, rather than requiring it as part of the code.
Have it say 7:30 or 8 o'clock or 8:15 or something like that? Right. All right.
So, well, thank you for the extra 10 minutes. We actually got through everything, so.
I move we adjourn.
There's a motion to adjourn, made by Councilmember Caldwell, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Pena. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye. The next council meeting will be next Thursday. It's a regular council meeting on March 8th. We are adjourned.